A 57-year-old man is plating a $40 piece of fish with a hand that has turned the color of a storm, and the most famous chef in Chicago is leaning over his shoulder telling him he is too slow. The hand is wrong. Anyone can see it. Two knuckles swollen flat, the skin tight and shining, the fingers curled because they will not open all the way anymore. He broke it that morning. He has not stopped moving since. It is 9 hours into a 16-hour double, and the man holding the tweezers has not said one word of complaint, because in this kitchen, a word of complaint is the last word you get to say. So he breathes through his teeth, and he sets a single sliver of fennel exactly where it needs to go, and across the gleaming dining room, alone at a corner table. A man in a dark sweater watches the whole thing through the pass. The man at the corner table comes here often. He tips the bussers in cash, in their hands, looking them in the eye. He knows the dishwasher's first name. Tonight he is not eating much. He is watching a man work himself to pieces for people who will never see his face, and he is doing the quiet math of someone who has decided that something is going to change. By the next morning, the doors of that restaurant would be locked. The name would come down off the wall, and it would never open again. This is the story of why. There is a restaurant in the West Loop of Chicago called Aubin, and for 11 years it was one of the best restaurants in America. 2 Michelin stars, a tasting menu that ran $395 before a drop of wine touched the table, and a reservation book that filled 2 months out the minute it opened. The dining room was all warm brass and low gold light, banquettes the color of good cognac, a single white orchid on every table. The kind of hush where you could hear silver-touch porcelain 3 tables away. People saved for a year to eat there once. They proposed there. They marked the end of chemotherapy there. They came for the experience of being, for 3 hours, somewhere flawless. And it was flawless. That was the thing. The food that came out of Aubin's kitchen was, by every honest measure, extraordinary. But there are 2 halves to every great restaurant. There is the room the guests see, the candlelight, the orchid, the murmured enjoy, and there is the room behind the pass, where the temperature runs 90 degrees and the language is different and nobody is smiling. At Aubin, those 2 rooms could not have been further apart. The front was a cathedral. The back was a furnace. The man who built both and ran both was named Adrian Vale. The man who broke his hand and worked through it was named Oscar Reyes. You will get to know the first man better than the second, and there is a reason for that. Because to understand why a good man stood at that station bleeding into a service towel, you first have to understand the man standing behind him and how he became someone who could watch that happen and call it dedication. The quiet regular at the corner table, the one in the dark sweater, was Keanu Reeves. He had eaten at Aubin maybe a dozen times over the years. He had never once sent a dish back, never once asked for anything, and never, not one time, raised his voice. He was about to do something louder than anyone at Aubin had ever seen. Adrian Vale was 49 years old, and from the outside his life was a clean, bright arrow pointing up. 2 stars, a cookbook on its 4th printing, a standing segment on a national morning show where he was charming and a little dangerous, the chef America loved to watch be tough. A second restaurant opening in Miami, a face that looked, on camera, like a man who had never doubted anything. But Adrian Vale had not been born into brass and orchids. He had been born in a row house in Cleveland to a mother who waited tables until her feet bled, and a father who left before Adrian could spell his own name. He had nothing. He knew it. And at 17 he walked into the only kitchen that would have him. A hotel basement. Brutal, hot, and he found, for the first time, a place where the rules were clear. Work harder than the man next to you. Never flinch, never explain. He was good. He got better. And at 23, he talked his way into the kitchen of a chef named Henri Castaing, a tyrant of the old French school. A man who believed that the only way to forge a great cook was to put him in the fire and leave him there. Henri threw plates. Henri burned the back of a young cook's hand against a flat top to teach him to respect the heat. Henri once made Adrian work a 14-hour service with the flu, on his feet, white as paper. And at the end of the night, Henri put a hand on his shoulder and said the only kind words Adrian had heard in 2 years. Now, you are a cook. And something in Adrian Vale broke that night and then healed wrong, the way a bone does when no one sets it. He learned the lesson Henri taught, and he learned it all the way to the marrow. Pain is the price of greatness. Comfort is the enemy. The cook who is allowed to rest, to heal, to be human, will never be excellent. And excellence is the only thing that matters, the only thing that ever lifted a poor boy out of a row house in Cleveland and into the warm gold light. He believed it. That is the part that matters. Adrian Vale was not cruel for pleasure. He genuinely, completely believed that when he stood over a man and demanded he keep working hurt, he was doing that man a kindness. He was forging him. The way he had been forged, the way the only mentor he ever loved had forged him. He had worked through 3 broken toes once, taped them, never stopped, and Henri had praised him for it. And he had carried that praise like a medal for 25 years. So when one of his cooks broke a hand, the question that formed in Adrian Vale's mind was not how do we get him to a hospital. The question was, is he the kind of cook who pushes through, or the kind I have to replace? Oscar Reyes had worked the line at Aubin for 22 years. He was there before the stars. He was there before Adrian was famous. He had stood at the fish station, the poissonnier in the language of the kitchen, through 3 remodels and 4 sous chefs and 1 fire, and his hands were the most reliable hands in the building. He did not want to run a kitchen. He did not want to be on television. He wanted to do one thing beautifully, every night, and go home to his wife Marisol and sleep. At 57, he was the oldest cook in the room by 20 years. He felt it. Every morning his knees announced themselves on the stairs. He had started to notice the young Comus cooks moving faster than he could. And he had started to do the quiet. Terrible math that every aging worker does. How many years left before someone decided he was too slow, too old, too expensive, and replaced him with a 24-year-old who would work for less and never need to sit down? So Oscar Reyes never asked for anything. He never called in sick. He never took the night. Because at 57, in a kitchen run by Adrian Vale, asking for mercy was the same as asking to be let go. On the morning of the night this story turns on, Oscar slipped on a sheet of black ice on the loading dock behind the restaurant at 6 in the morning, in the dark, carrying a case of halibut. He put his hand out to catch himself. He felt something go, a deep, wrong crunch, and he sat on the cold concrete for a full minute holding his wrist and breathing. 2 bones. The 3rd and 4th metacarpals, a doctor would later tell him. The hand he plated with. The hand he had used 10,000 times a night for 22 years. He thought about the emergency room. He thought about the bill. He thought about the morning prep that would not get done, and the look on Adrian's face if he called. And then he thought about the math. The math that is always running for a man his age, and he made the only decision a frightened man makes. He taped it. He pulled his sleeve down. And he went to work. The man at the corner table noticed within the first hour. You would not have, unless you were the kind of person who watched people instead of menus. But Keanu Reeves had spent a lifetime being looked at. And somewhere in there, he had learned to look back at the people the room was built to keep invisible. He saw the way Oscar held his arm. He saw the wince that flickered and vanished. He saw, when a server passed too close to the pass, the older cook flinch away from the contact, like a man guarding a wound. He flagged down the young runner refilling his water, a kid, maybe 20, and asked, quietly, plainly, "The cook on the fish station, is his hand all right?" The runner went pale, looked over his shoulder, and in the way that the truth comes out of people who have been holding it too long, he told him, "Oscar broke it this morning. Everybody knows. Nobody can say anything. Chef said if anyone's not on the line tonight, they're not on the line ever." The runner's voice dropped to almost nothing. "He's 57, man. He can't lose this job. So he's just doing it." Keanu Reeves sat very still. He did not stand up and make a scene. He did not march into the kitchen. He did not raise his voice, because raising his voice has never once been his way, and because a scene would have cost Oscar his job before the night was out. He waited until Oscar came through the dining room. Chefs sometimes do, to deliver a special plate to a regular, and when the older man set down the dish with his good hand, Keanu looked at him. Not at the food, at him. "That hand," he said gently. "How bad is it?" Oscar froze. For 1 second the mask slipped, and what was underneath it was not toughness. It was exhaustion and fear and a kind of weary dignity that asked for nothing. "It's fine," Oscar said. "Just sore." "You don't have to say that to me," Keanu said, quiet, no pity in it. "I'm not going to make trouble for you. I just wanted to ask." And Oscar Reyes, who had not told the truth to a single person all day, said the truest thing he could afford to say. "I can't lose tonight," he said. "That's all. I just have to get through tonight." Keanu nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Get through tonight." That was all. Oscar went back to the furnace. The man in the dark sweater paid his bill, tipped the runner more than the meal had cost, and walked out into the cold. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, his breath clouding in the streetlight. Then he made one phone call. It lasted 4 minutes, and he was gone. What happened over the next 8 hours did not look, to anyone watching, like anything at all. But Keanu Reeves had spent the years quietly learning that money, used well and used fast, can move walls. The phone call was to a man he trusted, a man who handled things, the kind of person whose entire job is to make a careful thing happen quietly and quickly. And the question Keanu asked him was simple. Find out who owns Aubin, find out if it can be bought, and find out tonight. By 2 a.m, the answer came back, and it was stranger than anyone would have guessed. Aubin was bleeding. Adrian Vale had overextended. The Miami restaurant was 9 months late and $4 million over. The television money was leveraged against it, and the brilliant, flawless, 2-star restaurant in the West Loop was mortgaged to the ceiling to keep the rest of the empire standing. Adrian Vale, the man who would never flinch, was 3 missed payments from losing everything and too proud to tell a soul, which meant Aubin was not a fortress. It was a house of cards in a beautiful room. And a man with the means and the will could buy the whole thing before sunrise, if he moved. Keanu moved. It was not cheap and it was not simple. And it took until almost 4 a.m, lawyers awake in 3 time zones. A number agreed to that, made even the man who handled things go quiet for a moment. But by the time the sky over Lake Michigan started to gray, the lease, the business, the name, and the keys to Aubin belonged to a quiet investment fund that bore none of Keanu Reeves's names. And the first instruction the new owner gave was this: change the locks. Tonight, before the morning crew comes in. He was not finished. There was one more thing he needed to do, and it was the thing that separated what he was about to do from simple revenge. He needed to talk to Adrian Vale. Alone. Adrian arrived at Auburn at 7:40 the next morning, the way he had every morning for 11 years, and his key did not turn. He tried it twice. He stepped back and looked up at the sign, at his own name in brass, and a cold thread of something he had not felt since Cleveland went up his spine. There was a man standing in the doorway of the locked restaurant. Dark sweater, calm, a face Adrian half recognized from somewhere, a corner table maybe. "Mr. Vale," the man said. "Can we talk? Just us. There's coffee inside." "Who the hell are you?" Adrian said. "And why do you have keys to my restaurant?" "It's not yours anymore," Keanu said. There was no triumph in it. He said it the way you tell someone bad news you wish you did not have to deliver. "I bought it last night, all of it. I'm sorry to do it like this. Come in. Let me explain, and then you can decide what you think of me." They sat in the empty dining room, two men at the corner table, the gold light off, and the orchids gone gray in the early sun. "I'm not here to ruin you," Keanu said. "I know that's exactly what this looks like. But I want you to hear me before you decide that's what it is." He turned his cup slowly. "I was here last night. I watched a 57-year-old man plate fish for 4 hours with 2 broken bones in his hand, because he was more afraid of you than he was of the pain. And I sat there and I thought, I can write a letter, I can complain, I can make sure he gets a night off." He shook his head. "And none of it would change the thing that did that to him. The thing that did that to him isn't a rule. It's you. It's the whole place. So I bought the place." Adrian's jaw was tight. "You don't understand what it takes to run a kitchen like mine." "Then tell me," Keanu said. "The real version, not the speech you give on television. Where did this come from? And maybe because the man was already ruined, maybe because there was nothing left to protect, Adrian Vale told a stranger the truth. He told him about Cleveland. The row house, the mother whose feet bled, the father who left. He told him about the hotel basement at 17, the only place that ever made sense. And he told him about Henri Castaing, the thrown plates, the burned hand, the flu service, the 3 broken toes he taped and worked through. And the words, 'Now you are a cook.' The only love he had ever been given in a kitchen, and the price of it." "You think I'm cruel," Adrian said. And for the first time, his voice was not the television voice. "I'm not. I'm trying to make them great. Nobody gets to the top soft. Nobody. I worked broken. I worked sick, and it made me..." He stopped. "It made you what?" Keanu asked. Gently. Adrian did not answer. So Keanu told him something of his own, not a speech. The real thing, the way it had to be done. "I've spent most of my life around people who think pain is proof of something," he said. "That if it didn't cost you everything, it didn't count. And I've been through enough of my own. I've lost people I loved more than I knew how to carry. Years where I wasn't sure any of it meant a thing. To understand the pull of that. The idea that the suffering has to mean you're becoming something. Because if it doesn't mean that, then it's just suffering. And that's unbearable." He looked at Adrian. "But here's the thing, I had to learn the hard way. The pain I survived didn't make me better. I got better in spite of it. And the difference between the two is the most important thing I know. Because if you believe the pain made you, then you have to keep handing it out. You have to." Otherwise, the math of your whole life stops working. Adrian's face had gone still. That man last night, Keanu said. Oscar, 57, plating with a hand he couldn't close. When you were 23 and Henry burned your hand on the flat top, did you think thank you? In that second, before you learned to be grateful for it? Did you think thank you? Or did you just learn, right then, how to do it to somebody else someday? Adrian Vale closed his eyes. It was a long time before he opened them. What do you want from me? He said. It was not a challenge. It was the smallest his voice had been since Cleveland. The restaurant's closing, Keanu said. Aubin is done. The name comes down today. That part's already decided, and it's not a punishment, it's just true. You built something beautiful on top of something rotten, and you can't fix that from the inside. You have to let it end. He stood. The name is finished. You don't have to be. Henri put you in a fire and told you it made you a cook. It didn't. You were already a cook. The fire just taught you how to burn people. You can put it down. Today, you're 49, not 80. There's still time to be something other than the worst thing that was ever done to you. He set a card on the table. No name on it. Just a number. When you're ready to be useful to somebody instead of hard on them, he said, call that, I'll help. I mean it. And he left Adrian Vale alone in the dark dining room of the restaurant that no longer bore his name. The staff arrived at 8 to find the doors locked and a notice in the window, and they stood on the cold sidewalk in their checks and clogs, frightened, certain they had lost their jobs. Keanu was the one who opened the door and let them in. He did not introduce himself with his name. He told them the restaurant had a new owner. He told them Aubin was closing, that this room would never again run the way it had run. And before the fear could take hold, he told them the rest. Every one of them had a job, if they wanted it. Same pay or better. And the place would reopen, in this same room, as something new, built on a single rule, which he said out loud so there would be no confusion. No one in this kitchen ever works hurt again. Ever. You are not a knife. You are a person, and you will be treated like one. And the food will still be the best in this city, because people who are cared for do their best work, not people who are afraid. Then he found Oscar Reyes in the crowd, his hand in a drugstore brace he had finally let himself buy. And he asked him to step aside, just the two of them. You said you just had to get through last night, Keanu said. You did, so you don't have to get through anything anymore. He paused. I don't want you on the line. Not because you're too old, because you're too good for it. I want you to run this kitchen, your name on it, if you'll let me. Your rules, the ones you've wanted for 22 years and were never allowed to make. Oscar Reyes, who had not asked for a single thing in 22 years, opened his mouth and found that nothing came out. His eyes were wet. He was pretending hard that they were not. And around him the staff understood what they were watching, and someone started to clap, and it spread the way it does, until the whole frightened crowd in the gray morning light was applauding a 57-year-old fish cook who had spent his whole life being invisible. Keanu was already at the door by then. He held it for the dishwasher, the one whose name he knew, and he stepped out into the cold, and he was gone before the first photograph could be taken. He never once said his own name the entire morning. Here is the part the easy version of this story leaves out. Because closing a restaurant in one night is the dramatic part, and rebuilding a life is the slow part, and the slow part is the only part that's true. The space stayed dark for 4 months. You cannot turn a furnace into a home overnight. There were permits and renovations and a kitchen rebuilt around a radical idea. that a cook who is hurt goes home, that a cook who is sick stays home, that the back of the house gets paid sick days and real breaks, and a manager whose job is to protect them instead of break them. It reopened in the late summer under a new name. Oscar named it himself. He called it Marisol, after his wife, who had spent 30 years married to a man who came home too tired to talk, and who cried when she saw her name in the window. The food was, by every honest measure, extraordinary. The critics came back. One of them wrote that the most surprising thing about Marisol was not the cooking, which was sublime, but the feeling in the room, a sense that the people making your dinner were glad to be alive while they made it. Oscar's hand healed slowly. 2 pins, a cast, 3 months of physical therapy he was finally allowed to attend. It is not as fast as it was. On cold mornings the knuckles ache. But it works. And it works without fear, and that is the only thing he had ever actually wanted. He hired a young commis named Theo, 24, the kind of hungry, frightened, talented kid that the old Aubin would have eaten alive. The first time Theo cut himself badly on a Saturday and tried to tape it and keep working, because that is what he had been taught everywhere else. Oscar took the knife out of his hand, sat him down, drove him to urgent care himself, and stayed in the waiting room the whole time. Theo did not understand why a head chef would do that. He had never seen it. He learned that day a different lesson than the one Adrian had learned at his age, and he will teach that different lesson to someone else one day. And that is how a cycle finally breaks. Quietly, one frightened kid at a time, and Adrian Vale. It got worse for him before it got better, the way it has to. The closing made the news. The story of the broken hand got out, told by staff who no longer had a reason to be silent, and the chef America had loved to watch be tough became overnight. The chef America was ashamed it had cheered for. The morning show dropped him. The Miami restaurant collapsed under its own debt. The cookbook went out of print. For most of a year, Adrian Vale sat in a small apartment in the dark, certain his life was over, certain he had become exactly what he swore at 17 he would never be. Nothing. It was 11 months before he called the number on the card. When he did, Keanu answered, and he kept his word. He helped, not with money, exactly, but with a door. Adrian Vale began, slowly and humbly, to teach. Not at a famous school, at a community culinary program for kids coming out of the kind of poverty he had come from, the kind that had made the fire feel like the only way up. He was good at it. He was, it turned out, an extraordinary teacher. Once he stopped trying to forge people and started trying to free them. He gave a talk eventually that went around the industry about the myth he had believed for 25 years, the lie that pain makes greatness, and the cost of that lie measured in the broken hands of better men than him. He did not perform contrition. He just told the truth, the way you tell it when you have finally stopped running from it. And 2 years after the morning the locks were changed, Adrian Vale walked into a restaurant called Marisol on a quiet Tuesday and asked the host if Chef Reyes had a moment. Oscar came out wiping his hands. The two men looked at each other for a long time. Then Adrian put out his hand, and Oscar, who had every right in the world to refuse it, took it. They talked for an hour at the corner table. No one knows everything that was said. But Adrian left lighter than he came, and Oscar went back into a kitchen where nobody was afraid. And that was enough. I've told a lot of stories on this channel, but I keep coming back to this one, and it took me a while to understand why. It would be easy to make this a story about a bad man getting what he deserved. It isn't, really. The thing I can't stop thinking about is that Adrian Vale was made. Somebody put a frightened 17-year-old in a fire and told him the burning was love. And he believed it so completely that he spent 25 years passing the fire along, certain the whole time that he was being generous. And what finally reached him wasn't a punishment. It was somebody saying, out loud, the thing nobody had ever said to him. The pain didn't make you. You survived it. Those aren't the same. And the man who closed that restaurant, he didn't do it to win. He did it because some things are built so wrong, all the way down in the foundation, that you can't fix them by being a little kinder inside the broken walls. Sometimes the kindest thing, the only honest thing, is to let it end so something true can grow in the same ground. I don't know if I'd have had the nerve to do that. To close something beautiful and successful and admired overnight because of one man's hand. I'd like to think I would have. But honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us are not sure. We tell ourselves we'd be the one who stood up, and most of the time we just finish our dinner and go home. And maybe that's the point. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for quiet kindness and for seeing the people the world is built to keep invisible. If it stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me the moment that got you. I read every single one of them. And if you know someone who has ever worked themselves to pieces in a job that never once said thank you, share this with them. It might be the thing they needed to hear today. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay close. There's another one coming that I think you'll feel. See you in the next one.